was a very interesting 2 days, and I think actually it was a very productive 2 days, but sometimes you have to walk, and this was just one of those times.
Welcome to the Journal Editorial Report. I'm Paul Gigot. President Trump walking away from a deal with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un in an abrupt end to their two-day summit in Vietnam. The president claiming that North Korea sought sanctions relief without offering enough in return.
Basically, they wanted the sanctions lifted in their entirety, and we couldn't do that. They were willing to denuke a large portion of the areas that we wanted, but we couldn't give up all of the sanctions for that. So we continue to work, and we'll see, but we had to walk away from that particular suggestion.
Retired four-star General Jack Keane is a Fox News senior strategic analyst. Welcome, General.
Glad to be here, Paul.
So what did we learn this week, you think, about North Korea and its willingness to denuclearize?
Well, first of all, they use the same pattern that they've always done, and that is give us something, and in return we have to give up sanctions on them with the promise that they would eventually give up their nuclear weapons. Well, this is the first president who didn't take the deal, and he walked away from it. So I think it's not a setback, it's a step forward, because we have declared that denuclearization is truly our objective. There's been some reporting that really what President Trump was seeking is some kind of normalization of relationship with North Korea, and possibly let them keep their nuclear weapons in exchange for security in the peninsula and economic prosperity. Well, that's not the case.
Okay, now we're learning more details about what some of the negotiations were specifically about, and the North Koreans are willing to dismantle, according to our sources, the Yongbyon nuclear facility. But that was as far as they were willing to go. Why isn't that sufficient? Because that's a big chunk of their program.
Well, it's a significant facility, to be sure. Plutonium, uranium enrichment there, but they have two other facilities where they also do enrichment. And it has nothing to do now with the arsenal of nuclear weapons that they have acquired. I think they probably have, Paul, sufficient fuel for the weapons that they already have, somewhere between 40 and 60. And
wow, it's 40 and 60?
Somewhere in there is where
our intelligence services
are reporting. So, and if the fuel's there, they're willing to give up something. It is a significant facility. I'm not disputing that. But it is not the core issue. The core issue are the weapons. And we're not talking about the rest of it. I know it's on the agenda. Chemical and biological weapons that they have also, which are quite significant.
The other thing that we are told by our sources that the North Koreans wanted was in particular to get rid of the post-2016 sanctions. Now, the sanctions before that were aimed specifically at their nuclear program. Those 2016 sanctions, this is after the most recent round of tests and so on, were aimed at the economy, really cutting off the economy as much as possible and the cash flow. That seems to be what they wanted from Trump in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, there's problems with these sanctions. The truth is, Russia and China are not in compliance with the UN resolution.
So the enforcement of them is a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Russia has never complied. And for the life of me, I don't know why we don't expose it. We got satellite photos. We can catch them in it. Put it out there for them. They're violating a resolution that they voted for. The Chinese, post-Singapore, has opened up the aperture as well and started to push commodities towards the North Korea.
That's after last year's summit in Singapore.
That's correct.
They basically said, okay, the era of good feeling is here, so we don't have to work as hard to enforce them.
And I think possibly the reason we're not calling out the Chinese on this is because we're working a trade deal with them. We're getting close to some kind of decision here in about 30 days or so. But I think we really got to double down on these sanctions, because it is the thing that brought North Korea to this first summit. And it is the thing that will keep them in this if there is some realization that they're going to denuclearize. It remains to be seen whether they're going to or not.
You don't think that it doesn't appear that Kim Jong-un has made the decision in a practical sense to denuclearize.
I can't speak to that. I just don't know.
But practically speaking, the evidence isn't.
The evidence would suggest that he's not going to. It took him 20 years with the ancestry to acquire the arsenal of weapons and the ballistic missiles. It's done for one reason only, to preserve the regime. What he wants in return for that, I don't think is necessarily economic prosperity. He would like that. But what's essential to him is security. And that'll take time to acquire the trust that's necessary between the United States and North Korea, South Korea, and China to be able to work that.
All right, you mentioned, let's talk about what comes next. You mentioned doubling down on the sanctions and enforcement and calling out violators. What else do we need to do?
Well, we need to finally get a path going forward. The truth is, North Korea refused to talk to us up until a few weeks ago when Steve Biegun, the envoy for Mike Pompeo, was able to finally talk to his counterpart. Let's put a structure and a pathway forward where we get experts talking to each other before we engage the heads of state. Let's not send the President of the United States over there with the page blank. Let's get it on the table. Let's know what their positions are. Let's begin negotiating those positions before we ever think about having another summit. Let's put that kind of negotiating structure in place.
What do you make of the President's criticism of the military exercises between South Korea, Japan, and the U.S.? He said they cost us too much money, they don't do much good. What do you make of that?
Well, I don't agree with them. The fact is the military exercises is the way that we maintain our readiness. And we have to have those exercises together. North Korea has one of the most formidable armies in the world, and it's buttoned up right on the DMZ. They have thousands of artillery pieces that are in the mountain on rail cars. And what they could do to Seoul is truly significant in terms of damage. We have got to work a conventional war with North Korea in the event that it would occur, and it's also a significant deterrence.
Well, and if you don't, briefly, if we don't renew those exercises, you're talking about a deteriorating ability to operate.
That's absolutely the case, and we've canceled 9 exercises in that period of time, and I'm hoping we get back to doing some of them. They don't have to do all of them, but we've got to do at least half of them.
All right, thank you, General. Appreciate being here. When we come back, the political fallout here at home from this week's summit in Hanoi. So is President Trump getting any credit for walking away from a bad deal?
Always have to be prepared to walk. I could have signed an agreement today, and then you people would have said, oh, what a terrible deal, what a terrible thing he did. No, you have to be prepared to walk.
That was President Trump in Hanoi Thursday, defending his decision to walk away from a bad deal with North Korea. So is he getting any credit for that decision here at home? Let's ask Wall Street Journal columnist and deputy editor Dan Henninger and columnist Kim Strassel and Mary Anastasia O'Grady. So, Dan, you heard General Keane. Was it a good decision to walk away?
It was a good decision to walk away. Obviously, it was not a deal that was going to come close to denuclearizing North Korea. And you have to give this president for being willing to do that. Compare it, for instance, to what Barack Obama did in his negotiations with Iran on that nuclear deal. I mean, there was a point beyond which Obama seemed to be obsessed with just getting a deal. And there were a lot of holes and flaws in that deal, so he got one for the sake of doing it. And in this case, you've got North Korea, and as the general described, this is a heavily nuclear-armed, chemical, biological weapons, a very dangerous country, and it would have been very bad to go in there and get a flawed deal that they could have taken advantage of. So I think he did the right thing to step away from it.
Mary?
He definitely did the right thing. I mean, it was the only thing that he could do, really, given the rhetoric that we've had up to now and the criticism, as Dan says, of the way that President Obama dealt with Iran. My big problem with this whole exercise is the human rights angle. I understand that he wants to deal with this very dangerous country, but I don't think it's necessary for the president to go out there and say, you know, I like him, he likes me, what's not to like?
But wait a minute. The president is thinking, okay, look, this is a regime run by this family, okay?
Right.
I've got to connect with him at a personal level in order to reassure him that we don't want to topple them, so that he's willing to make the concession on nuclear arms. So, look, if I have to butter him up over the top, as we know Trump tends to do, that's okay. That's the price of diplomacy. What's wrong with that argument?
Well, because then countries are going to wonder why he doesn't do the same thing for them. Why doesn't he have that same attitude toward all kinds of other dictators who are abusing the rights of people and slaughtering civilians and so forth? I think the U.S. has always had tried to have a moral stance towards human rights. And I think that when the commander-in-chief says what's not to like about the North Korean dictator, that's disturbing for a lot of people.
Kim, what about the political fallout here at home from the president's decision? I think he was praised for walking away by no less than Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader in the Senate. I have to say, I think that had he done a deal and come back, Schumer would have roasted him, and so would most of the Democrats for having made too many concessions.
Yeah, absolutely. He's getting praise, certainly from Republicans, even from some Republicans who are frequent critics of his foreign policy, guys like Marco Rubio, also from some Democrats. And I think, too, that there's a growing realization, this complaint out there that this all fell apart because there wasn't enough legwork done, that he rushed this summit and made it happen before things were ready. I'm not really sure that holds a lot of water. One, my own reporting, they were working this very hard in the months leading up to this at a lower level. But that also, I think, neglects, the fact that who are you dealing with? You're dealing with North Korea. In the end, it's a dictator. The only person that's going to make the final big decisions are Kim. And that is going to require at some point a meeting like this, and then you see what comes of it.
Well, the president, Dan, wants a victory. He wants a foreign policy victory like all first-term presidents. He wants a good economy, and he wants a foreign policy victory to be able to say, see, here's what I've achieved.
Well, I think he should move on. And the next thing would be perhaps a trade deal with China, which would be a big foreign policy victory.
All right, on that point, do you think walking away from this will help with the negotiations with China, telling the Chinese, look, it's not guaranteed you're going to get a deal?
I do, because China is obviously a much more serious negotiating partner. The problem with Kim is it's a one-man show, and the nuclear arms are the existential reason for being of North Korea. China is a serious country, a large country, a lot of interest, a lot of political, economic interest, and I think if they want a deal with the United States on trade of some sort, but I think they now understand that if they don't do something serious with the United States, with President Trump, he will walk away from it.
Just briefly, Mary, Otto Warmbier, the young American who was captured by the North Koreans and then ended up being killed essentially by them before he was returned. President said he believes Kim told him he didn't know about it until afterward. You buy that?
No. Nothing happens in a state like North Korea without the big cheese knowing about it. And so I think that's either naive or intentionally misleading.
All right. Mary, Kim, Dan, thank you. When we come back, former Trump fixer Michael Cohen unloads on his old boss. But did we learn anything new in this week's fiery hearing on Capitol Hill?
For those who question my motives for being here today, I understand. I have lied, but I am not a liar. Mr. Trump knew of and directed the Trump-Moscow negotiations throughout the campaign and lied about it. Mr. Trump knew from Roger Stone in advance about the WikiLeaks drop of emails. In July of 2016, days before the Democratic Convention, the President of the United States thus wrote a personal check for the payment of hush money as part of a criminal scheme to violate campaign finance laws. Questions have been raised about whether I know of direct evidence that Mr. Trump or his campaign colluded with Russia. I do not.
That was President Trump's former lawyer and fixer Michael Cohen Thursday on Capitol Hill, testifying before the House Oversight Committee and leveling a host of accusations against his former boss. Cohen, who will soon begin serving a 3-year sentence for his own crimes, including lying to Congress, denounced President Trump as a con man, racist, and a cheat. But did this dramatic testimony reveal anything new about the legal troubles facing the president? We're back with Dan Henninger, Kim Strassel, and Wall Street Journal editorial page writer Kate Batchelder-Odell. So, Kim, how much damage did Cohen do to the Trump presidency this week?
Well, look, it's never great to have a guy out there for hours talking about you and, reminding everyone that you have a pretty steamy tabloid and New York past, okay? But the problem, though, I think, for those who were really investing a lot in the Cohen testimony is that, you know, Americans already knew most of this about Donald Trump, and they elected him anyway. And then in terms of the actual allegations he made, not only are they disputed by some people, but it's not clear that they are necessarily crimes, those things that he's talking about.
Let's talk about some of those in particular. I want to talk about the campaign finance, the payoffs to the women that Cohen claimed came from money personally from Trump to him to reimburse him for that. How vulnerable is the president on that specific issue?
Well, in terms of the issues of campaign finance, look,
yep.
Here's the problem with that, is that we have had, the question goes to the president's intent, all right? I mean, whether or not when he knew about this, these things are still in dispute. If he wrote the check, this is certainly the claim from Mr. Cohen. But even if he did, was his intention to actually help his campaign, which is what Mr. Cohen claims, or was it to protect his family and hide this information from those because it's an embarrassing episode? Did he do it for personal reasons? If it's the latter, it's a much harder case to make that is an actual campaign finance violation.
Right, Dan. What about the new thing we didn't know, which is that Cohen's assertion that Trump knew in advance about a WikiLeaks dump of Democratic emails that had been hacked in July of 2016?
Well, the question is, to what extent would that pertain to any sort of criminal behavior? I mean, he said, well, that's swell, and if there was going to, you know, disadvantage his opponent, I guess the president was going to be in favor of that. But there was no evidence. Roger Stone has said he did not have a conversation with the president about that. And, you know, at the end of the day...
And there's no evidence, by the way, that Roger Stone actually had any contact with Julian Assange at WikiLeaks, even though Cohen asserts that that Stone bragged about it in that meeting.
Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, the big question is, what effect, as we asked earlier, is this going to have on the American people and their judgment about Donald Trump? Pretty clearly, the Democratic Party has decided that their job going forward is to diminish and drive down Trump in the public's mind. So you've got Bernie Sanders out there. He's got these lines. He calls him a homophobe, xenophobe, liar, racist. And the idea is that somehow you're going to diminish his standing in the American public. At this point, Paul, what difference can that make? Everybody, as Kim suggested, knows this already. 99% of Democrats hate him. Maybe 45% of the country agrees with that. Is it going to move the needle between now and 2020? I really doubt it. And the question is, at what point does this begin to backfire on the Democrats, who have this obsession with the character of the president, when the president is out there, like meeting in North Korea with Kim Jong-un and doing things the presidents do?
You know, Kate, it was interesting to watch, to hear that Nancy Pelosi, when asked about this, the House Speaker, she said, well, I really wasn't watching. Yeah. And I think that's related to the fact that she doesn't want the Democrats to be seen by the country as preoccupied with potential for impeachment. And yet, when you look at what the committee chairmen are doing and the hearings that they're setting up, they are indeed trying to set up enough information so that if they want to, they can bring impeachment charges.
Sure. I mean, they're grinding toward impeachment, and I think at this point it's going to be hard to tamp that down. And like Kim was saying, we have here a campaign finance violation that really may or may not actually be a crime. I mean, I think, you know, Brad Smith, a former FEC commissioner, has made a very compelling analysis about why it's not, especially if it was even a mixed motive about wanting to avoid embarrassment to his family or wanting it not to be an issue in the campaign. It would be a harder legal case to press. So I think here that's the problem Democrats face, is they have this really questionable impeachment case. I don't think you can impeach a president for a campaign finance violation. I just don't think it'll work. And yet they're just moving in that direction so fast that they kind of are getting pushed in that direction.
And Kim, what about the Russia probe? Is there anything new that we learned here that would play into the evidence of collusion, or be able to kind of make I guess a circumstantial case that Trump knew about some things with Russia in advance of them being disclosed?
Well, put it this way. In terms of the Russian collusion case as the way it has been advanced for the past 2 years, no. Michael Cohen said, I have no evidence of collusion. The question, though, is Democrats are very worried that Bob Mueller is going to come out with a report that also makes that case. So they're already on to phase 2 of their collusion theory, which is about Donald Trump's finances and whether or not there wasn't some collusion or bad practice in terms of his investment interests in Russia. In particular, Trump Tower in Moscow. Apparently, this is what Mr. Cohen was asked a lot about in some of the closed sessions he has this week. This is where Democrats are focused now.
Okay, so there's going to be that that new salient opened. All right, still ahead. This week's Cohen hearing seen by some as the start of the Democratic push for impeachment. But would that strategy backfire?
And impeachment is a divisive issue in our country. And let us see what the facts are, what the law is, and what the behavior is of the president.
All right, I brought in Ensure Max Protein to give you the protein you need with less of the sugar you don't. I'll take that.
30 grams of protein and 1 gram of sugar. Ensure Max Protein in 2 great flavors.
The crispy and Cajun fish sandwiches are so simple that everything from...
News headquarters, hello, I'm Marthel Neville. President Trump wrapping up a whirlwind week with an address at the Conservative Political Action Conference in Maryland. The president telling supporters he would win the 2020 election and do it by a wider margin than he did in 2016. He also mocked Democrats' proposed Green New Deal to fight climate change and called House lawmakers' growing push to investigate him, quote, sick. We are awaiting an announcement from the Sacramento District Attorney on whether 2 police officers will face charges in the deadly shooting of Stephon Clark. The unarmed 22-year-old was shot and killed last year after running from police and going into his grandparents' backyard. Clark was suspected of vandalism. That news conference is underway right now, and we will bring you that announcement as soon as we get it, so keep it right here on Fox News. I'm Marthel Neville. I'll be back at 4 with Eric Shawn.
I think having a fake hearing like that and having it in the middle of this very important summit is really a terrible thing. He lied a lot, but it was very interesting because he didn't lie about one thing. He said no collusion with the Russian hoax.
President Trump reacting to the testimony of his former fixer and attorney, Michael Cohen, and questioning the timing of Wednesday's hearing on Capitol Hill. Cohen's appearance, seen by some as the first step in the Democratic plan to impeach the president. So would that be a smart strategy heading into 2020? Let's ask Wall Street Journal columnist Karl Rove. He's a former senior advisor to President George W. Bush. Welcome, Karl. Good to see you. What's your takeaway politically from the hearing this week?
Well, look, Cohen is not a very credible figure. The only time he really has credibility is when he says things that work to the advantage of the man that he called a con man and a racist. So when he said he was not aware of any Russian collusion, that was of benefit to President Trump. But if the Democrats pursue an impeachment strategy, unless there is a lot more that comes out from Mueller or a lot more that comes out from the Southern District than we think than is out there today or that we think is likely to come out, then Democrats can't go it alone. When a political party is seen pursuing impeachment on a partisan basis and not a bipartisan basis, it redounds to the disadvantage of the party that is pressing forward with it. We saw it happen to the Republicans in 1998 in the midterms. Democrats actually gained seats in the midterms as a counter-reaction to what the voters perceived as an overreach.
But what about the campaign finance point? I mean, if Donald Trump wrote a check to Michael Cohen to reimburse him for payoffs to these 2 women, then, and the president has said publicly, well, I didn't have the affair and I had no role in the payoffs, and now you got a canceled check from the president personally. I mean, that looks really bad.
Well, it looks bad, but I'm not certain it necessarily is bad, because he could simply assert, I was doing this in order to protect my family, in order to keep this hidden from my wife, and in order to stop public embarrassment, public and private embarrassment. I mean, we have candidates who pay their tax liens in the middle of a campaign. Is that a campaign expenditure? because they've now paid their taxes.
No, but what about the issue of credibility, though? I mean, if the president lied to the public, I mean, you know, you wouldn't have told President Bush, yeah, you better lie and cover that up.
No. Look, though, I thought the point that Dan Henninger made earlier was right. We didn't learn anything new about the president. Did we know that he's a cad? Did we know that he had these affairs? Did we know he was an unpleasant person? Sure, we already knew those things. What did Michael Cohen tell us that we already didn't know? We already knew that he had already reimbursed Michael Cohen for this. This has been a story out there for months. So what new there did the American people get that would cause them to say, I'm going to reevaluate what I thought about President Trump, good or bad? And I'm not certain there was much of that out there.
All right, well, let's say, so we've got the Russian collusion narrative, which is going to be told to us, I guess, at some point by Robert Mueller.
Right.
But what about this new avenue that Kim Strassel said the Democrats plan to open up on Trump's personal finances? Is that something that could get him into trouble?
Oh, I think so. And Kim talked about it with regard to the financing of the Moscow project. But there's also, we saw this in the committee hearing this week with the boss, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, asking about, well, did he inflate numbers or deflate numbers on insurance? On doing business with insurance companies. So we're going to see two different lines of thought here, I think. One is going to be, did he have any financial ties to the Russians based on the Trump-Moscow project? And a second one saying, let's go back and see, did he ever have problems with telling banks or insurance companies the wrong numbers, telling the banks that the properties were worth less than they were, or overstating his assets? I don't know what kind of a legal vulnerability that would be, because I think it would depend upon the specifics that might be uncovered, and was it of a magnitude that would cause people to say this constituted fraud?
Well, and also I think the question would be, look, if this is something that happened before he was president, is that, and its behavior unrelated to the presidency, is that a politically salient enough story to justify impeachment?
Right. Does it? I mean, the Constitution says high crimes and misdemeanors, which is not got a lot of definition around it.
Right.
So it's sort of like, art. What's good art? I know it when I see it. What's a legitimate grounds for impeachment? I think we'll know it when we see it. But that's why the Democrats have to be very careful, because, again, if this is done on a partisan basis, and if this is being driven by the shrill voices, some of which we saw this past week when Congresswoman Tlaib of Michigan goes after Mark Meadows in a deeply personal fashion, calls him a racist, says he's committed a racist act. That's exactly the kind of over-the-top behavior that causes a political party to be seen as unworthy of having power.
You wrote in your column for us this week that Robert Mueller, when he issues his report, if he doesn't indict people, he should not include in that details about people that might be critical if there is no decision to indict. Explain that.
Well, actually, slightly different than that. Robert Mueller is obligated to give a confidential report on all of his decisions to indict, and also all of his decisions not to indict. They're called declinations. It's up to the Attorney General, William Barr, to decide which of this he makes public. And my point was that the rules of the Department of Justice say you have to be sensitive to the privacy and reputational rights of people who are not charged. And I don't think it does the country a lot of good for the Attorney General to go into a lot of detail about, well, here are all the people that we decided not to charge, and here's how we decided not to charge them. The one exception would be is if they said, look, the president did something that is indictable, but since our Justice Department policy is not to indict a sitting president, this will have to wait until he leaves office. In that one instance, the Congress ought to receive that information so they can make a determination if it rises to high crimes and misdemeanors. But other than that, let's not repeat what Jim Comey did to Hillary Clinton and trash her reputation even after he decided not to indict her.
Okay, Carl, good advice, I think. Thanks for being here. Still ahead, a Trump judicial nominee comes one step closer to confirmation, but Naomi Rao's troubles may not be over yet. Plus, the Supreme Court considers the fate of a cross-shaped war memorial in Maryland in a key test of the First Amendment's Establishment Clause.
Let's be honest.
President Trump's pick to replace Brett Kavanaugh on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals came one step closer to confirmation this week. Naomi Rao was voted out of the Senate Judiciary Committee Thursday, but she may not be out of the woods yet as her nomination heads to the full Senate. Democrats have tried to portray Rao's college writing as racist and sexist, and she has faced headwinds from some Republicans as well. We're back with Dan Henninger Kate Batchelder-Odell, and Wall Street Journal editorial board member Alicia Finley. So, Kate, we knew the Democrats were going to oppose Rao, but what were the Republican concerns?
Well, Paul, we had a bit of an event this week when on Sunday Josh Hawley emerged and told Axios that he had some current concerns about Naomi Rao. They seemed to center originally around her personal views on abortion and also a legal theory known as substantive due process. But that sort of evolved throughout the week, and he met with Ms. Rao on Wednesday and said they had a productive meeting, and he ended up voting for her in the Judiciary Committee on Thursday, where she was recommended 12-10.
Well, but I did a lot of reporting on this week, as you did, and I mean, what I found out that there was no substance behind the Hawley accusations, or I guess they weren't formally accusations, concerns, and yet he went public with them. That struck me as odd.
Sure. I mean, especially on the question of whether she was pro-choice. First of all, this is not a relevant question to whether she can be a fair and impartial judge, and she has a record that shows she can distinguish her own policy preferences from what the law says. And so I don't think Republicans should be in the business of starting these litmus tests in the first place. But also, you're right, it was based on very scant evidence that she even was personally pro-choice or that there was any concern here at all. So to take that public, I do think that was irresponsible.
Is she going to go to the, is she going to get through on the Senate floor?
I think so, Paul. I think the Judiciary Committee was probably her biggest hurdle. I don't think any other Republicans are going to want to go alone on taking her nomination, but I do think the Democrats will be pretty unanimous in voting against her.
Yeah, okay, all right. So let's turn to the Bladensburg Cross case. Alicia, this is about the establishment of religion, about a cross on public land. It was first built as a war memorial for World War I veterans. And the question is, can you have that kind of a symbol of Christianity on public land?
Right, so this cross was built 93 years ago. It was actually originally on private land. The state took over because of traffic reasons, of all things. The American Humanist Association, a left-wing group that opposes any kind of religious entanglement with
government,
sued. The question here is whether this violates the First Amendment's Establishment Clause, and the Supreme Court's jurisprudence on this issue has been notoriously messy. Back in 2005, you had the Supreme Court came down on the same day, two cases, upheld the Ten Commandments, government right.
In one place.
But in another place, it struck it down. Stephen Breyer was in the majority in both cases.
What do you think is going to happen in this case?
Well, I think the Supreme Court's probably going to provide a very narrow ruling, maybe even 7-2, because if you follow the oral arguments, even Elena Kagan, Stephen Breyer were somewhat sympathetic to this cross, but they were also indicating, well, if a government were to do the same thing nowadays, that's probably not kosher.
So it doesn't look like, Dan, this is going to be clarified at all by the Supreme Court in terms of setting a standard where governments can say yes, no, and a clear, bright line.
Which is very unfortunate, because we remember about 3 decades ago the Supreme Court had this decision banning a Christmas creche. A lot of the country went crazy when that happened. And Stephen Breyer, in I think it was 2005 decision, when they were talking about removing a display of the Ten Commandments, said the Establishment Clause exists to avoid creating the kind of religious divisiveness that doing something like that causes. I think that is absolutely right. Former Justice Kennedy said the standard should be, it is okay if the government is not actively proselytizing on behalf of a religion. What could make more sense than that? The country can't deny that these religions exist and it's part of our heritage.
All right, thank you all. When we come back, as calls grow on the left for Medicare for all, more than 100 House Democrats sign on to a new bill that would eliminate private health insurance in the next 2 years.
It is time to ensure that health care is a right and not a privilege, guaranteed to every person in our country. It is time for Medicare for all.
Move over, Green New Deal. House Democrats this week unveiling sweeping legislation to address another progressive priority, Medicare for All. The bill, introduced Wednesday and co-sponsored by more than 100 Democrats, would eliminate private health insurance within 2 years and move all Americans to a government-run plan. We're back with Dan Henninger, Kate Batchelder-Odell, and Alicia Finley. So, Alicia, the bill, what would it do precisely?
Well, beyond what you just said, it would also create these quote-unquote global budgets for hospitals, which in effect is rationing. They want to control costs by imposing budgets on these in which they could ratchet down. These are price controls by another means and bring back the death panels.
So what they would say is basically you get a pot of money.
Right.
And we'll decide how much you get. And we will decide, this is the government, we'll decide what you can pay, what you can spend it on, what you can, what we'll reimburse.
This isn't even really fee-for-service Medicare, traditional Medicare. This is actually a new single-payer system, a little more like what you have in the UK.
And what about, say, Kate, employer-sponsored health insurance that most Americans have? Is that, that's gone too?
Yeah, that's gone, Paul. I can't believe I'm saying this, but this bill is much more radical than Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All bill. Because of that 2-year transition time, Bernie would have at least allowed for 4 years. I mean, we're talking about dismantling employer-sponsored health insurance over 24 months. If you remember some of the technical problems in the Obamacare rollout, that was not masterful, and that was about setting up a website. So this would be an enormous undertaking.
And 100 Democrats are for it. Does that, politically, that create some problems for Nancy Pelosi? I mean, is she going to have a vote on this in the House this year?
I think she is, Paul. She'll try to avoid it. And one interesting thing is that there are 100 Democrats on this bill, but there were more on the past bill, including Jim Clyburn, who's no longer on the bill. So that sort of shows you some of the rift here. And there are a lot of Democrats who are very skeptical about Medicare for All and want to just throw more money into Obamacare or allow people to buy into Medicare at an earlier age.
Go ahead, Dan.
Well, very quickly, I think Medicare for All is, in a sense, laughable as a socialization of American medicine. Republicans should take it a little bit seriously because some of these Democratic candidates are not buying into the whole thing. They say we should do it incrementally. Health care is a significant issue for a lot of American people and its cost. The Republicans better come up with their own answer.
Well, one of the problems here for politically is that what it would do to traditional Medicare, presumably.
Right, this would end Medicare as you know it, as well as the private Medicare Advantage plans, which are growing in popularity, now constitute about a third of plans.
So you would be able to, I mean, the Republicans would be able to say, Dan, look, to seniors, you like your Medicare, you won't be able to keep it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a potential real political downside.
Yeah, the only role for private insurance would be able to provide supplemental things that are not covered by Medicare for All, which virtually covers everything. It would be a sliver of the market.
Well, and Republicans think this is a political gift for them, but I guess I would argue it's only a political gift for them if they make the case against it. And if you're spending all of your time, or a lot of your time, arguing against Michael Cohen, you're not explaining the downside, Alicia, to the American public about Medicare for All. Because when you think about just the slogan, Medicare for All.
Well, this is why they use Medicare.
It sure sounds better than government-run health insurance.
That's exactly right. Republicans have stumbled on explaining health care in the past on Obamacare. I mean, they used it in 2010, but really over the last couple of years, they've really been on the defense and have not been able to articulate their position on expanding consumer choice and competition. And the question is if they can really break through on this issue.
One word, socialism.
Has some punch these days.
Not working for the Democrats these days.
All right, thank you all. We have to take one more break. When we come back, hits and misses of the week.